The MIT Sloan School of Management has always been a different kind of business school from the rest.
At MIT, we talk about addressing the world's biggest challenges, and that right there says it all for impact.
The Sloan central purpose is organizations are the path by which great ideas have an impact in the world.
We are in the business of helping people become better leaders, principled, innovative leaders who improve the world.
I have brilliant colleagues, but also colleagues who, at the core, are working to improve the world and to build something for real.
But so every person and every colleague that I have at MIT, I think our business is to try to make the world a much better place.
Today's world, you see a tremendous amount of alienation, of class separation. But one thing everybody agrees on is entrepreneurship is a great thing.
Bill Aulet, in many ways, is the example, from central casting of the entrepreneur turned catalyst. He likes creating the conditions so that others can learn. And he has been an extraordinarily successful leader of the Martin Trust Center.
It's my firm belief that studying sustainability is perfectly suited for a school of management.
For years, John has been basically driving home this idea of how it's all a systems and we have to view the world through a systems lens. Here's someone who is absolutely at the top of his game as a scholar, and yet is completely committed to translating that scholarship into change in the real world.
What I'm really interested and excited by is to figure out how to use insights from finance and financial tools to improve the world.
Antoinette has this knack of finding problems and data that lead to pay dirt, that lead to something that has much broader implications. And when she digs into a problem, she often goes 1 or 2 layers deeper than other people have, and she finds out things that other people have missed.
Taking care of complex systems is almost like taking care of a human. You need to really understand the underlying mechanism of the current problem in order to really fix it.
We worked with a number of groups, failed multiple times, and then came across Retsev and his team. This work has had an enormous impact on the lives of thousands of patients. Partnering with Retsev and folks at Sloan has been so enormously helpful to us. Not only understanding the science of operations management, but actually making it happen in an organization that is made up of people.
At Sloan, we often like to say a better world is our business. That has a lot of implications, and I think this is a very profound statement.
It's a great idea that's turned into a great action that makes the world a better place.
The questions that are incredibly ambitious, that are incredibly impactful to humankind.
How we engage with that outside world, business leaders, policymakers in every kind of organization.
Using capitalism, which is the most powerful force the world's ever seen, to be able to take and make the world a better place.
And so if we can contribute to that, if we can have impact with our ideas, that's the ultimate reward.
Good evening. Hi, my name is Dave Schmidtlein, and I'm Dean of MIT's Sloan School of Management. Thanks for coming out and participating in this celebration this evening. You just saw a glimpse of some of the stories that unfold at the MIT Sloan School every day. You saw leaders in our community tackling some of the world's most challenging problems, and you also saw leaders from the wider world who have gotten an opportunity to work with some of our Sloan faculty and have been grateful and amazed. We're in the business of developing principled, innovative leaders who improve the world. And we see that in our faculty, in our students, in our staff, and in our alumni. You know, it's not just a saying that ideas are made to matter at MIT Sloan. And as you saw in the video, a better world really is our business. The challenges that appeal to us, faculty, staff, students, and alumni, are complicated ones. They're not a little bit of accounting, a little bit of finance, or a little bit of marketing. They're important challenges. They require creativity and deep analysis. They require a desire to make a really huge impact in the world. Make no mistake, the world needs that kind of impact today, in this time of change and certainly some challenge. When you look at the recent headlines, you know that the ways that basic science, foundational research, and translational research, including finding new drugs, are going to happen have got to change. The public sector is not going to play the role that is played historically, and we need to figure out new models for all of that activity, and that's happening at MIT Sloan. We need to develop new replacements for outmoded transportation systems, healthcare systems, and that's not going to be solely a public sector solution. We need brilliant people working with the private and public sector, and that's happening at MIT Sloan. We need new approaches to sustainability, sustainable business processes, to a healthy planet. And we know from the headlines this week that that's going to require new approaches, new leadership, new models for getting what needs to be done. We know that cybersecurity and digital resilience is going to play a much greater role in our safety and security over the next 10 years. And we know that effective mechanisms aren't just going to come from technology, science, and engineering, but also from an understanding of how human beings interact in social and economic systems. And that combination of expertise is coming from MIT Sloan School. The needs are great. Progress is real. MIT Sloan is in the middle of it, energetic and effective. It's natural to think, I hope, of our faculty as leaders in this regard, and they are. And you'll be seeing a little bit more of that just to come. But it's not only our faculty. I'm incredibly proud of the alumni that I've gotten to meet over 10 years, thousands of alumni. And let me just call out a few examples of the way that alums are contributing in these respects. So some of you know Frederick Karrast. Just 8 years ago, he was an energetic, entrepreneurial student at MIT Sloan, and now is the founder of Okta out here in Northern California. He has a billion-dollar valuation company, but equally importantly, that company is making an important contribution to digital security. Another of our alumni happens to live here, might even be here this evening, Patrick Flynn. Patrick, are you here? Yeah. There's Patrick. So Patrick is the Senior Director of Sustainability for Salesforce. And the work that they're doing, creating new processes around environmental and more broad sustainability issues, are not only going to transform that company, but they are already clearly going to represent a model for other firms to emulate. We could talk about Jean Hammond. So Jean is a successful entrepreneur, but the thing that I find so extraordinary and amazing is the way that she's mentored hundreds of women to allow them to follow in her footsteps as successful entrepreneurs. And she's helped some men too. And lastly, just to round out a sense of the diversity in our alumni community, I want to call out Lorenzo Mendoza. So as he often is, Lorenzo Mendoza is in Venezuela. He is a national hero. He's been described as the last, strongest protector of civil society in that country. He's a successful business person. He's also probably the bravest person that I know. And when I've asked him why you continue to stand up so publicly against tyranny in a situation that clearly represents a present danger to his life, he says someone needs to do it, and who else but someone from MIT. MIT has changed, I would suggest, all of the people who come through its doors. But among the things that I've learned over 10 years is that the biggest changes aren't in the skill set, the expertise that people have developed. That's great, and that provides great opportunities. But the change goes beyond that. It changes how people think. It changes what you as alumni actually choose to do. And I would suggest, and many alums have told me, the concept of having been at MIT, what it represents to them, has changed who they are. That's not something that people say about other leading schools of management. There's another thing, a second piece of this MIT experience that they'll talk about when you ask them what was important. The idea of MIT matters, but also the people matter. And so I want to turn back to one of the very important groups of people. Our alums tell us that faculty made a big difference to them. Different faculty for different alums. But that they were changed, indeed, but they were changed because someone changed them. Now, I can't bring a dozen faculty with me on these events, but I can tell you a story. And the story I'd like to tell you is one of Professor Roberto Rigobon. Does anybody know Roberto Rigobon? Unaccountably, he seems to have some followers in this room. For those who don't know Roberto as well, Roberto has done nothing less than reinvent the way that market conditions, economic conditions for products and for countries are measured and managed. This project, known as the Billion Prices Project, starts by monitoring every day the prices of hundreds of thousands of items in thousands of markets in 100 countries. Professor Rigobon's work is changing.
David, why don't you allow me to take it over?
All right,
thank
Roberto.
Hi, I was here in the museum trying to steal a couple of Matisses here. And then security told me that I had to go to jail behind bars, and I found all of you together. So first, thank you, David, and it's a great privilege for me to be here, especially talking about my passion, which is my research and the Billion Prices Project. Let me tell you a little bit about the story of how this came about. And in that story, I want to tell a little bit what your role has been in the production of that. For hundreds of years, economists, we have asked the question, what is the inflation rate of a country? What is their GDP? What is the demand? Is the demand too high? Is it unsustainable? Etc. These are questions that are very important for economics to understand in economics whether or not a country can sustain itself, at least economically speaking, at least financially speaking. That has driven economics to think about measurement. Now, nowadays, what occurs is that we are continuing measuring those aspects, those questions, exactly in the same way that we designed them half a century ago. At the Billion Prices Project, an alumni from here, an Sloan alumni, Alberto Cavallo. Does anyone here was a classmate of Alberto? There you go. So Alberto and I had the idea that technology could change that. And we wanted to change the way we measure economics. This is a very non-sexy topic. I mean, no one in economics wants to do this. But if you know Alberto, I mean, he's really good looking, but if you see me, I am clearly genetically designed to be non-sexy, so this is fine. So it actually corresponds tremendously with who I am. So poor Alberto, anyway. But in the process of this, I remember we started in Alberto's laptop, downloading from 4 countries, 4 retailers, about 2,500 items in each of these countries. We learned, and in fact, we started with Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Colombia. And the main reason is because I knew the owners of these supermarkets, so I could actually ask for permission. From there, we learned how to download the data. We became greedier, so I bought a server and I put it in my office. That was not enough. Then I bought 3 other servers and I put all of them in my office. Then the fire department came and said, that's a fire hazard. In fact, it was super hot, I'm telling you. I mean, if you wanted to lower your weight and also learn some economics, you could come to my office. And so actually, they kicked me out of my office, and we go down to the basement. And, at the beginning, I was using the servers from Sloan. That was not enough. Actually, I purchased servers from Sloan, and there was a moment in time which we actually were using and owned 3/4 of the computing power of the Sloan School. In order to send an email, you even had to ask for permission. So David kicked me out of the institute. Anyway. But this process, what I want to say something about this process, we download today, as David correctly said, we download from more than 100 countries, more than 1,000 retailers, and we download millions and millions of products. And our goal is to change the way we measure inflation rate, the way we measure demand, the way we measure and understand natural disasters, etc. And we have accomplished that. But how this project exists is the outcome of a very special institution. This would have never happened in any other place. This is a lousy Venezuelan economist, okay, trying to use computer science techniques to download data and gather data, using non-standard techniques in statistics to answer economic questions that are extraordinarily non-sexy. See, the National Science Foundation, they work in silos. They take the money from economics to economics. They take the money from computer science to computer science. This was a project that actually was nowhere and everywhere. It was a freak. It was a typical MIT project. And not only was supported by Sloan and MIT, it was embraced. And in fact, today, we are helping more than 20 statistical offices on Earth to change the way they gather data, or we are even gathering the data for them, any of the two. We are changing the way central banks work and analyze their data. We're changing financial markets. We're changing the United Nations. When there's an earthquake, the best information we have about an earthquake are their physical characteristics, the amount of energy released on the earthquake, and the images on TV. That is the best information we have until today. How much is the economic impact of that earthquake? We will learn that 9 months later. I consider that unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. And not only that is unacceptable, I think we can do better. And thanks to MIT and by transitivity to you, we have been able to change that. That's not the end of the story. Actually, I don't know how many of you guys have these devices like an Apple Watch or Fit or the Microsoft Band, but something that happens is that the day you get one of these devices on your wrist, suddenly you start walking more. Haven't you realized that? You see, oh my God, I haven't reached my 10,000, so you start stepping faster. That's why I walk so much, you see. I always working on the computer, then thank God for these conferences, I can get fit. Anyway, so, but what is interesting about this is that these devices, when you start measuring yourself, you change your behavior. There was a paper by John Hauser, a very, very old paper from the 1970s, again, another faculty from MIT. In the title, it said, "You are what you measure." I have no idea what the rest of the paper says. It probably is all wrong, but the title is absolutely and completely correct. And the way I think about the sustainability of the world is that I have a framework that I call PROMISE, where PROMISE stands for all the dimensions that matter to actually have a fulfilling and what I call a happy life. So P stands for personal, R for relationships, O for organizations, N for markets and economy, I for institutions, S for social and political, and E for the environment. If we want to make this world a sustainable place, we need to be sure that we are sustainable in all the dimensions. If you have a country that is great at the environment, the political system works, the economy works, but people are unhappy, that doesn't look like a sustainable place. That's not a sustainable community. On the contrary, if you have people that are incredibly happy, but everything else is screwed up, well, that's Brazil. We know that's not sustainable. And when you have People unhappy and angry all the time. Their relationship sucks. The organizations are lousy. The economy is horrible. The environment is not taken care. Well, that's the Trump cabinet. We know that will not last. So we need to find a way to be consistent among all these dimensions. And all of this starts by measurement. This is not sexy, but it's fundamental. How do you know that a relationship is in bad shape? Usually when it's broken. How do you know a person is sad? Usually when we diagnose depression. How do you know a lake is being polluted? Usually when we lose it. How do you know a society is upset? The day you see the riots. Or where in France they have one every weekend, but that's a minor point. But truly, we measure this badly, with delays, incorrectly. So my challenge to you is, help us. Help us not only make a better world. I want to do much more than that. Let's make sure that we can construct a world that is sustainably and permanently better, where we are fair and equal, where we are considerate, we're compassionate, we actually not only care about each other, but we respect each other, we are understanding, we are somehow accepting, surprisingly. We can do that, because actually that's our goal at MIT. Let me finish by telling you what I think is the most important aspect that I find at Sloan. I call this the humbleness shock. Every day I enter to Sloan, I feel inadequate, profoundly inadequate. And the reason is, I suddenly see what the other faculty at MIT are producing, how smart they are, how relevant their ideas are, how extraordinarily their impact is going to be, how ambitious they are on the questions that they want to answer. And it's hard not to be overwhelmed by that. Every day I come to MIT and I have interactions with the staff. Their pursuit of excellence is unique. People that actually set up an event like this one, this doesn't happen randomly. These are hours of tremendous amount of effort and incredible patience and attention to details. And that happens everywhere at MIT. And the staff, it's a teaching lesson every day. And then I actually encounter you guys. Well, that's actually also good. It's actually a privilege to share the room with 300 of you every single year. It's a way in which I learned. Why my research is what it is? It's because of you. It's because the questions that you ask, the challenges that you pose, that you force my research to be relevant. And to make it relevant to you makes that it will be relevant for all. Because you force me for my ideas to matter to you, then it matters to all. So I want to thank you for that, because I am the outcome of this interaction. I know it was completely unintended, but thank you anyway. So what I want to do is to finish by showing you some videos from some of the faculty at MIT, so I can share with you their research. Now, I want to clarify something very important. I mean, they're sending you a video. Is that okay? I am here. So this, I don't know, but I mean, who loves you more? Is that okay? I mean, I just want to make very clear that these guys, they send you a face live. I mean, I don't know, they maybe tape it in the bathroom. I have no idea, okay? But I am here. So in some sense, I think you will be mesmerized. More seriously, that means that when you go back to your reunions at MIT and you are thinking about the bottles of wine that you want to give to your faculty, remember I was here. I mean, okay, so if you bring one bottle for John Sterman, bring two for me. Is that okay? Yeah, it's not like we have a tally, but I am winning, okay? So now, more seriously, I just want to give you leave you with some videos from the colleagues, and thank you so much for your time and this privilege. Thank you.
I grew up in a complex system in the Israeli military. I spent there almost 12 years, and when I started my academic career, I tried to kind of study similar systems. And it's very hard to think about systems that are more complex than healthcare systems. It's also a very important system in terms of what it delivers at the end for the world and for individual people. including people that are close to me. So we started at some point to really try and address major patient flow disruptions that the MGH had in their perioperative care system, in moving patients that finished their surgery in the operating room into the recovery area that is typically called PACU. The first question they ask us, how many beds do we need to add to the PACU? Very quickly, we realized that the real problem is not between the operating rooms and the PACU, the recovery area, but in fact, the inability to actually move patients from the recovery area to a general floor in the hospital. The key is actually not to start and talk about the problem in terms of efficiency, but actually start from how do we improve the experience of the patient. When you try to improve the experience that the patients have, you actually also improve the efficiency of the system. Maybe unlike what people could think if they kind of don't dive into the details. You know, when I teach the students in the class about complex systems in general, but on health systems in particular, I always tell them that if you want to change something, you need to understand how it was created. You need to actually assume that there is an underlying rationale that created the current system. A rationale that is not necessarily taking its roots from purely logical aspects, but also cultural aspects, value aspects, political aspects. The Sloan School of Management and MIT are one of the few places that could integrate those perspectives in an effective way. What I like about the Sloan School of Management is you have a very high density of people that really aspire to change the world and make it a better place. We have all the elements to actually leverage the expertise to create a new way of thinking about these systems, both in the United States and across the globe, in a way that I think could actually have a global footprint.
MIT Sloan really is a place that I adore. It's never just research for research's sake or to just publish, but to achieve something or to change something in the real world. So people thought that in the crisis of 2008 that the subprime customers and the subprime segment were driving the disarray in the market. Now, when we actually looked at the data, we were really almost shocked and surprised when we saw that this is actually not what was going on. We looked at very large-scale data sets that allowed us to map the entire mortgage industry and the entire mortgage market in the US. And what we found is that the subprime market, yes, it was growing in the pre-crisis period, but most of the mortgage dollars were flowing to middle-class and upper-middle-class people. So exactly the opposite of the subprime narrative. In addition, we actually found, if we look at post-2008, where did the defaults come from? The biggest increase were in middle-class households and upper-middle-class households, not so much in the subprime. Now you can ask, how come that people didn't see this before? What did we do that others didn't do? The big difference in our work that we actually really looked at individual decision makers. It will tell you that it doesn't help the financial market if we prevent poorer people from also getting mortgages because they were not at the heart of the crisis. But if you look at the data post-2008, it has become extremely difficult for lower-income households and even younger households to buy houses and to have mortgages, while richer people still have access to mortgages. So why is it so important for me that we get this right and that we understand the real sources of the crisis? Because we really want to make policy that's evidence-guided, that's evidence-based, that's not just opinions that people have. And if we have this better understanding, we can actually help industry and policymakers to level the playing field in the right direction for people.
I consider myself an accidental academic. I was really just a business person. And as a business person, I was really a basketball player who couldn't play anymore. And I liked the whole part of business where it was merit-based, where you could really earn it. And I felt that being an entrepreneur was more merit-based than when I was working at IBM, because I could impact things more directly. So the conventional wisdom has been that entrepreneurship can't be taught, and it's just something you're born with, or it's magical. And I think that this first got cracked in 1991 when Ed Roberts wrote the first book that took entrepreneurship seriously as a field of study, where no one had really done that before. The Martin Trust Center for MIT Entrepreneurship first believes that entrepreneurship is a craft. It's not an art, it's not a science, but it's something that can be taught, but it needs to be taught with first principles and kind of strong mentorship as you would teach a craft. We're not focused on, is this startup going to work or not? We are trying to teach people how to fish, not catch a fish, to be able to do it over and over and over again. We start with the heart. This creates the spirit and mindset that people want to be. The second thing is, it's a head, it's the knowledge. The third one is the hands, because it's not just enough to know what to do, you have to implement it. And the last H is the home. When you walk into the Martin Trust Center for MIT Entrepreneurship, every detail has been thought through, every square foot. There's a coffee machine, and it's a really good coffee machine. And you have to understand, we are very, very cheap. But spending money on the coffee machine is one of the most important things because it brings people together. Every detail is thought through so the students can create serendipitous collisions to work with each other. But then when they want to start to work, they can go off and they can find their nooks to work with people together. And they can do different types of work there, including building product. We have the best students in the world. And they don't take themselves too seriously, but they take their mission very, very seriously. And as this world gets to have more and more uncertainty, more and more crises and expectations, I want our students to be the ones that say, we're not going to be broken by that. So we work very hard to take whatever your original idea is to build a meaningful company. And by a meaningful company, we mean a company that has an impact on the world. So it's my firm belief that we can contribute in a major way by taking what we teach for entrepreneurship and getting it out to the masses in the world. Not just people who come here to MIT, but entrepreneurship at a massive scale. By that, I mean millions of people.
Back when I was in high school, my father brought home one of Jay Forrester's early papers on the world model. It had a huge impression on me. And I ended up then coming here specifically to study system dynamics. Climate change is happening now, and we haven't yet experienced the worst of what's going to happen if we don't dramatically cut emissions. Research shows that showing people research doesn't work. So we had to come up with a different approach. And our approach is to develop our management flight simulator into climate policy simulation. It's used by policymakers in the United States, in France, in China, in Brazil, in other countries, by the UN. And that's important, but it's not sufficient. If there had been a perfect climate agreement reached in Paris or in Marrakesh, it would have been dead on arrival when it came back to all the capitals of the world, because there simply isn't at this point enough grassroots support for the legislation and the policy changes we need to cut our emissions fast enough. So we created an interactive role-play simulation of the global climate negotiations that we call the World Climate Exercise. We immediately are able to show them what's likely to happen, and what research shows is that, in fact, people who go through this experience learn more about climate science, become much more emotionally engaged around the issue, feel a greater sense of urgency, want to learn more, and express a much greater intention to take action in the real world. Over 30,000 people have participated in the World Climate Exercise in just the last year and a half, and it's growing very rapidly. People are going to the website, everything is there for free, and they're learning how to run it entirely from those materials on their own and taking it to essentially every continent on the planet. Being a school of management, we seek to change the behavior of humans. We seek to influence the way people structure their enterprises. And that's not just an intellectual exercise. That requires touching people's emotions, reaching their hearts as well as their minds. It's really quite amazing to see. That's a great day.
We shine a light on the dark corners to look at complex problems in a whole new way.
We know that there are solutions to be uncovered. It's just a question of how much digging is needed to illuminate them.
The approach we take in our work is a kind of light switch. That is the transformation we seek in the way we approach and solve complex challenges.
There are solutions to many problems that today we can't see. But the reason we can't see them is not because they don't exist. It's only because nobody has yet pulled them into the light.
This is what we do at MIT Sloan. I want to join Roberto in thanking Dave for inviting me here today to break through the fourth wall and be with all of you in person. Although I am disappointed about one thing, which is that I lost the coin toss, and I was hoping to go first and not have to follow Roberto. He's an impossible act to follow. I can't compete with the Latin charm. I mean, I don't know if there's such a thing called Asian charm. I don't think so. But at least I have more hair than you, Roberto. So I want to tell you about some of the things we do at Sloan, particularly with regard to my research. And I want to begin with an investment, because I know that there are a number of investment professionals in the audience here. So I've got an investment project that I want you to consider. It costs $200 million upfront. It's going to take 10 years before you get any kind of payout. And the chances of a positive payout is 5%. 95% of the time, you lose everything. How many people would invest? No takers. Wow. Now, when I present this to my MBA class, occasionally I'll get an intrepid student who will raise his or her hand and say, Professor Lowe, you didn't tell us what the return is in the 5% case where you do succeed. Most people don't even ask, because with 95% failure rates, they're not interested. Well, what I just described to you is the back of the envelope for a cancer drug. And if in the unusual chance that you succeed, a cancer drug is worth about $12.3 billion. So let me recap. $200 million upfront payment, 10-year waiting period, a 5% chance of $12.3 billion, and a 95% chance of nothing. How many of you would invest now? Show of hands. It's just too risky. It's not interesting. Now, this is a very stylized example, and as those of you who are in the biomedical field know, there's actually quite a lot of money in cancer, particularly at the later stages of drug development. But the problem is, at the later stages, the risk is mostly gone. The early stages of drug development, the so-called valley of death, is where there's a real funding gap. And it's just too risky for investors to get involved. And this risk has a real impact on patients, as I discovered a few years ago when my mother was dealing with lung cancer. I was introduced to a very successful biotech company developing early-stage therapeutics for all different kinds of cancer, including lung cancer. I was privileged to meet with the chief scientific officer, who heard I was a finance professor, and so he brought along his CFO. And the two of us talked along with the CSO about various different things. I asked what I thought was an innocent question, which is, does your source of financing have any influence on your scientific agenda? And the response I got was absolutely shocking. The chief scientific officer shook his head ironically, looked at his CFO, and turned back to me and said, influence? Our financing drives our scientific agenda. It drives it. And I got to tell you, from the perspective of the son of a patient, I was absolutely outraged by that response. Because what do stock market volatility, interest rates, and Fed policy have to do with whether you should treat cancer with angiogenesis inhibitors or immunotherapy? Nothing. But it drives their scientific agenda. Now, I'm no life scientist, but shouldn't the science be driving the financing and not the reverse? The problem is, at the early stages of drug development, the risk is the greatest, and investors don't like risk. And so over the course of the last 10 years, as drug development has gotten more sophisticated and more risky, money has been coming out of the space, particularly early stages, and moving to lower hanging fruit, which is things like fintech and edtech, social media, software development, all the things that all of you here in the Bay Area know and love. But the cost of that is not enough money for other things. So, drug development is getting more complex, funding is getting scarcer. What do we do about it? Well, what if we could use financial engineering to change the risk-reward profile of these investments? How? Simple, we do it all the time. Instead of investing in one of these projects at a time, what if we invested in a whole bunch of them, 150 of them, all at the same time? And now I know what you're thinking. That sounds crazy because you'd need 150 times 200 million or $30 billion. Where are you going to get $30 billion? Well, as an economist, I have a very simple answer. Assume we have $30 billion. I'll come back to that. If we have $30 billion, the risk-reward trade-off changes because the power of diversification reduces the risk and increases the likelihood of success. In particular, do you know what the probability of getting at least 3 successes out of 150 independent trials where each trial has only a 5% chance of success? Do you know what that probability is? Turns out a little bit more than 98%. That's right, you have a 98% chance of producing at least 3 successes out of 150 tries. And if you get those 3 successes, what's your portfolio worth then? Well, 3 times $12.3 billion, or about $37 billion. And if you have a portfolio that is worth $37 billion with 98% probability in 10 years, you can actually finance that using debt. You can issue cancer bonds, and the collateral are the underlying projects. Now, how much can you finance using these cancer bonds? Well, it depends on the risk of those bonds. You can issue up to $37 billion of face value of debt, and the default rate on that debt is 1 minus 98%, or 2%. A default rate of 2% means you're talking about single to AA rated debt, which as of last week yielded 3.07%. And when you take the present value, as all of you remember how to do, I'm sure, the present value is $27 billion. So of the $30 billion, 27 of that I can get by issuing these bonds. And if we use all the other tricks of the financial trade, things like securitization, collateralized debt obligations, credit default swaps, and derivatives, I can do even better. Now, I know you're snickering and wondering, really? Is that really a good idea? Didn't those tools figure prominently in the financial crisis? And I got to tell you that it was studying the financial crisis that got me thinking along these lines. You know, the financial crisis didn't happen because these tools didn't work. It happened because these tools worked way too well. They are incredibly powerful instruments that can take enormous sums of capital and deploy them for specific purposes. So imagine if we reconfigure these markets and instruments to pump these resources into dealing with some of society's biggest challenges, like cancer, and Alzheimer's, and diabetes, and climate change, and fusion energy, and so on. Imagine if we could do that. We could change the world. Now, can you really do this? Well, that's exactly what my collaborators and I at Sloan are trying to figure out. So we're running simulations, coming up with new business models and analytics, collecting data, running case studies, and bringing all the various different stakeholders together to examine these issues. And the early results suggest that actually they work even better than expected in many cases. And right now, there are 2 or 3 pilot projects that are in the works. So over the next 6 to 12 months, I think you'll see some interesting things happening along these lines. And now, I know that to talk about rates of return in the same breath as life and death issues like cancer may seem incredibly callous and obscene. My mother died of cancer, so I get it. But if we don't talk about rates of return, we're not going to get the funding that we need in order to deal with these challenges. And we have to keep in mind that finance doesn't have to be a zero-sum game if we don't let it. We can do well by doing good. And with your help, your support, your encouragement, and inspiration, we can do this now. So I want to thank you for giving Roberto and I an opportunity to tell you a bit about the things we do at Sloan. And now let me ask Dave to come back to the stage for some final thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. You may or not remember, Andrew's voice was the first voice that you heard this evening on that first video. And he said that the MIT Sloan School of Management has always been a different kind of business school. I hope this evening has reminded you of some of the ways in which that's true. Big, complicated challenges. The willingness to work hard, work smart, to bring insights from, yes, operations and systems and modern finance and entrepreneurship, mind in hand, rigor and relevance. Smart, but also inventive. Open, but also grounded. That set of words, no other school is using them because they couldn't. At MIT Sloan, you were taught, pick a challenging, important problem. Dig in for the facts. Use rigor and creativity and invent the future. The future is probably a good way to end this evening. And when I think about the future, I think about our current students. And I know what you're thinking. I don't actually have a current student who's going to come out on stage and be a surprise guest. It's spring break. They're elsewhere, let me tell you. But I do want to tell you a story about one student, and then we'll close. So the student happens to be a person who was my advisee during her first year at MIT Sloan, and so I saw the application that she wrote for admission, and in particular, the essay that she wrote in response to the question, why do you want to come here? This is what she said. The rooster flew across the classroom. It was the one my grandfather brought to school on the first day of class of first grade. He brought it in hopes that the teacher would take the gift and let him stay, but he could not. His father, my great-grandfather, was a fighter in the war for Korean independence, and the families of all of those people were banned from education. Fortunately, Korean independence was achieved a couple years later, and my grandfather was able to start school just a couple years after his peers. He loved education so much that he became a school teacher in that same small town. And his dream was that his son would go to the best university in Korea and would use his education to make a positive difference. That's my father, who's a doctor in Seoul. My grandfather's dream, my father's dream, and mine is that I will follow in their footsteps and go to the best university in the world and use education to make a positive difference. Those kinds of stories happen all the time. They're all different, but in a way they're all the same. When Thomas Friedman, the journalist, came to MIT a few years ago to spend a couple days with our students, one thing that they told him stayed with him and became the headline for the story that he wrote. What they said to him is, "We are the people we've been waiting for." To develop those people, this is the part where I ask you for support. Get your shields up. But you know, I think those people are worthy of support. And I hope you see that. And if you don't, then I've failed them. Our faculty, working on the kinds of challenges that they work on, I think they're worthy of your support. And if you don't see that, then we've failed them. 10 years ago, we knew that MIT Sloan needed to enter a new era in supporting students to pursue leadership on a global basis and supporting our faculty to engage in some of the large-scale projects that you just heard about. And we trusted that if we took the first step in that regard, and if we asked you for help, you would respond. And you did. This year, in the start of this MIT public phase of the campaign, we're doing that again. We have to. We're increasing dramatically our support for students, and we're increasing dramatically our support for faculty to work on these kinds of large-scale problems. And we're hoping, and we're trusting, that you will make those changes sustainable. So I know that you care about MIT. It's a terrible thing maybe to say that caring isn't enough, but it isn't. I need to ask you to make a gift to MIT. Please make a gift this year, this month, this week. Not more than you can, but not less. So within the MIT campaign, a better world is our business is the phrase that we're using. That can seem honestly a little bit like a slogan. I think if you know the people in our community, if you listen to the people that we heard from this evening, they honestly believe it. They're honestly trying to live that purpose. I think you can see it in their faces.
To us,
A better world.
is not a lofty vision.
It's not an improbable hope.
It's not a convenient platitude.
It's not even a charge to everyone.
Because then it's a charge to no one.
A better world is ours to make.
A better world is our business.
We know that the important problems today
are complex problems.
Complexity is our call to action.
We start with questions.
Dig in to find facts.
Build and rebuild.
Ideas made to matter.
In our solutions.
Prove that no problem is too big.
When we're working on it together.
The promise that we take with us
Across borders, boundaries, and walls.
Is that we will stay curious.
And we will stay brave.
Driven by our conviction.
That fixing what's broken
and inventing what's better
isn't just possible.
It's inevitable. We are the ones to do it.
Because impact is our bottom line.
Making a difference is in our DNA.
And though our burden of responsibility is great,
our ability to change the world
is greater.
Today and tomorrow.
A better world.
A better world.
A better world is our business.